For today's video, I wanted to share 3 meals that I made for dinner this week. All of these were super simple, came together in about 45 minutes, so perfect for weeknight dinners. Videos like this are always super helpful for me when I'm trying to figure out what we're going to eat that week, so I hope this is helpful for you too. So the first thing I made for dinner was these shredded chicken tostadas. These are super easy to put together. First I boiled some chicken, so here I'm just adding some different vegetables into my chicken broth. I did some cilantro, onion, garlic, jalapeno. A lot of this is just stuff that I had in my fridge and I just decided to throw in here. I'm also seasoning this with some chicken bouillon, some garlic salt, and some pepper. Then I'm going to add some water up to the top to make sure that the chicken is covered, and I'm going to set this at a medium heat on my stove for about 20 minutes. And then once everything comes to a boil, I'm going to turn the heat down to low and loosely cover it with a lid. My lid here didn't fit this pot, so it's perfect. You don't want to cover it fully because then it starts to overflow, so I just left a little gap in there. And after 20 minutes, this is what the chicken looked like. I just removed it from the pot and let it cool down. And once the chicken had cooled down a bit, I started to shred it. I typically use my hand or 2 forks, but I wanted to try this trick out that I've seen people do with a hand mixer. It did not work for me. I think I prefer using my hands or just 2 forks. This is more work than what it's really worth. So I put that aside and just went back to my old ways of just shredding it with my hand and 2 forks. And once the chicken was shredded, I added some salt, some pepper, and a little bit of that chicken broth just to season it and moisten up the chicken. Mixed it all together, and the chicken was done. While the chicken was cooking, I also put together a really quick salsa. So I am just boiling 3 tomatoes and 1 jalapeno, and I let that simmer on the stove for about 20 minutes. I had some of this leftover salsa from the day before, and I didn't want it to go to waste, so I'm just going to combine that with this new salsa that I'm about to make. And once I tasted the leftover salsa, I realized that it was actually really spicy, and it did not need that extra jalapeno that I had boiled, so I used that for something else. I also added a small piece of onion and some oregano along with some more of this chicken bouillon powder. And then I'm going to blend that together until it comes to a smooth sauce. And here the sauce is ready. I'm just pouring it into this bowl and I'm going to give it a quick taste to make sure that it doesn't need more salt. In this case it was good, so this is perfect and my salsa is ready. I'm just going to set that aside while I prepare the rest of my ingredients. I really like to top my tostadas with some pickled onions, so here I sliced some red onions. I'm placing them in this bowl. I'm just going to sprinkle some salt over the onions and then squeeze in some lemon juice. You can also use lime juice, but lemon juice is what I had. And I'll give everything a really good stir and set that aside, and those are pretty much done. And the last thing that I'm prepping here are some refried beans. I'm just simmering these on the stove so that they thicken up a bit. I do like my beans to be a little thicker when I add them to my tostadas. Okay, so here are all of my toppings. I have some of these tostadas. These were left over from another meal that we had the previous week. My beans, chicken, some shredded lettuce, the pickled onions, some salsa, and then I also have some queso cotija that I'll sprinkle on top. And I really like making tostadas because everyone kind of gets to build their own, and you can add as much or as little of whatever toppings or ingredients you like. So here I'm building mine. I like to add a really good layer of beans because I really love refried beans. And then I'll add some of that chicken on top, a good amount of chicken. I also love to add a ton of lettuce and a good amount of pickled red onions and lots of salsa. So this is just what I added now, but then as I was eating it, I added a lot more salsa. I loved my food to be drenched in salsa. And then I finished that off with some of this queso cotija, and these were delicious. I don't really make these that often, but they're so good, so I'm definitely going to start making these more often. And moving on to our next meal, this was actually my favorite meal that I made this week. We have a lot of chicken breasts around here, so I like to find ways to keep chicken breasts interesting. Here I have 2 chicken breasts that I sliced down the middle to make into smaller, more even-sized pieces, and I'm seasoning this with some of the Trader Joe's, I think it's called the lemon garlic seasoning. It's really, really good. I'm also adding some paprika, a little bit of salt because that other seasoning has some salt in it, and then some pepper. And then I'm going to drizzle a little bit of oil. I was kind of running out there, so I didn't have much left in there. And I kind of patted in the seasonings and then turned the chicken over and did the same thing onto the other side. To cook the chicken, I added a drizzle of olive oil and melted just a little bit of butter onto this pan on medium heat. And then I'm going to grab each piece of chicken and dust some flour, or I guess dip it into some flour, shaking off some of that excess flour and then placing it right into the pan. I didn't want to overcrowd the pan here, so I'm just going to work in batches. I did 2 pieces of chicken at a time. It took about 3 or 4 minutes for each side to be done. So I flipped it over, cooked it onto the other side, and then removed it onto a plate. and then did the same thing to my other 2 pieces of chicken. So once the chicken was done, I made a really quick pan sauce. I added about half a tablespoon of butter into the pan where I cooked the chicken, and I added 4 cloves of minced garlic, cooked those for a few seconds, and then added half a cup of water and the juice of half a lemon. And I let this simmer for about 4 minutes. Oh, I also added some of this chicken bouillon powder. I would typically use better than bouillon the vegetable base, but I didn't have any, so I added this chicken bouillon powder along with some dried parsley. And I'm letting this simmer for a couple of minutes and waiting for some of that sauce to reduce. And then after 4 minutes, this is what it looked like. I added about a tablespoon of butter in here and let that melt, and this really helped to thicken up some of that sauce. At this point, I kind of regretted not making more sauce because it was honestly so good that I would have loved to have more sausage drizzle on top of my chicken, but it's okay, this turned out fine. I also tasted it for salt, and I think I added a little bit of salt, but it didn't really need too much because that chicken bouillon powder is pretty salty. And once the sauce was done, I added all of the chicken back in here. I also added all of that juice that the chicken released while it was resting, and I'm just tossing the chicken in here, so turning it over on both sides, making sure that everything is nice and saucy. And this is what the chicken looked like once it was done. It was so good, so flavorful, so citrusy. Easily one of our favorite meals this week, and probably one of our favorite meals ever. I served this with a side of white rice and some zucchini, onion, and corn. The last meal that I have here is super simple. I like to have a very easy and simple meal in my meal plan at least once or twice a week. It encourages me to continue to cook at home and not get takeout instead when I'm feeling really lazy. Because even though I love to cook, I don't always feel like cooking. So I decided to make some hot dogs and air-fried french fries. I chopped up my potatoes and placed them in a bowl of water so that they wouldn't brown while I prepared the rest of my vegetables. And then I sliced an onion, I think it was half an onion, and some jalapenos. And here I'm just rinsing my potatoes. I'm trying to get some of that starch out. And once they're rinsed, I'm going to dry them very well with a paper towel before seasoning them up. So I'm going to season them with some salt, some pepper, some paprika, and I'm going to add a drizzle of olive oil and toss everything really well. At the same time, I was preheating my air fryer at 380 degrees. So now I'm adding all of those potatoes into my air fryer, and I'm going to air fry these for about 15 minutes or so. At about 7 minutes, I came in and gave them a toss, and this is what they look like once they were done. I was very surprised at how good these turned out. I didn't really feel like cooking this day, and I was trying to make everything really quickly, so I didn't think they would come out that good, but they were actually really good. Now I'm going to cook my vegetables, so I am going to toss the onions and the jalapeno in some oil for a few minutes until they're a little bit softened. And then here I'm adding a little bit of water to help caramelize the onions and jalapeno, and it also helps them soften. So I'm going to do this a couple of times until I get them into that texture that I want. And this is how I wanted them. This is perfect. I think I forgot to say we were having hot dogs today. So I just cooked up the hot dogs, put them on a pan with a little bit of oil until they were nice and warm. I don't make hot dogs very often. Honestly, I don't make them, I don't think, ever. And I just don't have a favorite brand of hot dogs, so these are the Hebrew National hot dogs that I got. They were okay. They honestly weren't my favorite, but it's okay. This was a really quick dinner. So here I'm just putting everything together. So I'm adding the hot dog into the bun, and then I'm going to top it with those vegetables. I didn't show it here, but we also added tons of ketchup and mustard because we don't like dry hot dogs. And this is what they look like once they were done. This wasn't the best meal ever, but it was okay. It got us fed and we were happy. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you on my next one.